So what can you make stump grinding? Thus far, when I've run my spreadsheet out and I've pulled 8 months of data, like I did this spreadsheet calculation, so I'll share it with you, because I've taken some time off in the summer, so the numbers will be a little bit different and not quite as accurate. On an 8-month calculation for this year, I've been at $250 an hour for machine hour that I've put on a Carlton 715 stump grinder. So I've got like a 74 horsepower stump grinder, and I've been at $250 an hour that I've run that machine. That doesn't include the miles I had to put on the truck, or the trailer, or the tires and brakes and oil changes and transmission association costs. Like, you know, every time you run your vehicle, you need to figure out what that costs you. I estimate it cost me about 50 cents a mile to run. That's fuel, tires, brakes. I know every 150,000 miles, you better budget for a tranny, you know, so, you know, things like that. Every 250,000 miles, if you're going to keep the truck that long, you know, you might need an engine. You might not, you might not, but you need to have that allocated because it's obvious. I mean, you ran the truck 300,000 miles, don't expect to not buy a transmission or an engine. That's just part of the cost. 50 cents a mile for me on this truck. I'm running a 2500. I'm running a gas Chevy 2500 4x4. It's a great truck. It's about as cheap as I can run per mile. Might be able to run a little bit cheaper with an older diesel truck, but for the moment, this is about as cheap as I can figure out to run. And those have been the numbers. So the numbers have been really great. The way that I figure out my numbers is I look at horsepower. So I want to see how much revenue per horsepower an hour am I getting. So it's like a horsepower to hour ratio. So 74 horsepower machine, $250 for every in revenue for every hour that the machine is run. You know, quick calculation, it's basically running at $5 a horsepower an hour, which is amazing. If you're in the Bobcat space, you're probably familiar with some guys. I like to charge by the quote, by the bid. But internally, I'm always calculating. Okay, you know, what am I getting per hour to run this machine? Essentially, that's my biggest cost of my business, is like I'm expensing out my machine. And you will know that, you know, down in the South, guys are running at $1.50 a horsepower. That means the guy's got a 60 horsepower Bobcat, and he's maybe out there for $90 an hour. That's $1.50, right? Over, you know, up in the northeast, I know guys are running at $2-3 an hour. That's very common for a guy to run at $2-3. Now, whether or not they do that calculation in their head, I don't know. But that's the way that I do things, and I find that to be profitable in business, you really need to be at that $2 level. Like, if you can find a way to be at that $2 level, you'll be fine. You know, you got a 100 horsepower machine, you're getting $200 an hour for it, you'll be fine. You got a 50 horsepower machine, you're getting $100 an hour for it, you'll be fine. But you really make your money when you get above that $2 level. And so the stump grinder is in my winning category for the moment. Now, the economics of it could change. You know, it's very localized. It's, you know, the economics of it could very well change. But for the moment, every hour that thing runs at pricing that I have now, that thing's getting $5 an hour. Very, very happy with that. I'm very, very, you know, the only other thing that I found that was running almost as good as that, and I really not even, was the forestry mulcher skid steer, which is a whole nother video. But the forestry mulcher skid steer at $3 an hour horsepower. You know, let's just play this out. 110 horsepower machine. A lot of guys are going to disagree with this because a lot of guys' numbers are 150 an hour. I know a lot of guys are going to disagree with this. 110 horsepower XHP. I know they're not making the XHP Caterpillar 299 anymore, but let's just go with that, all right? So 110 horsepower machine. I know you got another machine up top because you know, on the front of that thing, that's a $40,000 grinder up there. So it's almost like you're running two machines. You need to calculate for that. But you know, 110 horsepower, I definitely ran them for $300 hours. Definitely. Not all the time though. Like most of the time, my numbers were about $200 an hour. So I was at like a little less than $2 a horsepower. So it's good and it's not good, as opposed to the stump grinder. Now the difference is I could put 60 hours on one of those machines a week. Stump grinder, I'm not putting 60 hours on a week. So it's a different mix. But I like it because for where I'm at, my town has just been developed. Like 10 years ago when I got into bobcats, there was still a lot of building to be done here. At this point in time, it's pretty well done. And I'm not saying that there's not bobcat work to be done, because there's always a tree dying and a tree needing to be, bobcat's like the most useful tool out there. But as far as like clearing new land, not so much. So the real opportunity is about 40 miles to my south, which is great. I have fallen out of love with the 14-hour days, like in the Florida heat. I'm not so about it. Plus I have a family to get home to, and they want to have dinner at 6 o'clock and all that stuff. And when I'm out running, I just not as great. Now there are ways in the mulching, just like applying capital, there are ways in forestry mulching where we can go up in machine if you have the proper work for it. My ideal lot was a 1/4 acre to a 1 acre lot, so skid steer worked out really good. You can transport it with an F350 and get there and bang it out, you're done. But if you move up to a Barco, or something like that, you're talking a 250, 300 horsepower machine, and you're fixing, and your jobs are quoted by the acre, by the square foot. You're definitely going to get way more production, and you're going to go, you're going to triple your horsepower, but you're playing with that number. Or, let's say you got a 300 horsepower machine. Are you getting 600 an hour to run it? You might not be quoting like that, but those are the numbers I'm playing with in my head. That's how I'm calculating things out. Now, I would be in forestry mulching to get $2 a horsepower when everything's said and done. I know most people do quotes, and I agree with doing quotes, but when everything's said and done, revenue on the job divided by hours that went on the machine divided by horsepower. What is my number? It better be higher than 2. That's, for me, it better be higher than 2. If it's not, if it's down to $1.50, $1.90, all that stuff, I'm like, I don't love it. It's just not my thing. With the grinder, it's like, I run my numbers, I calculate it out, and it's fat. I can't complain. Like it's sweet, and I like that. I like those type of businesses that the margins are nice and cushy like that, because there's a lot of room to run with that. So hope you guys got some value out of that.